You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. the live stream. Detroit is different and Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit. All right, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Public Comment. I am Khary Frazier of Detroit is Different. And here I have some very special guests that are co-hosts in this journey with Public Comment. Malachi, how are you doing, my brother?
Good morning. I feel like I complain about the weather a lot on this show, and I'm going to do it again. I'm sick of this cold.
Hilarious.
I'm happy to be here, but I'm sick of this cold, man.
All right. And also added to the mix, as you all have been seeing, it's like now I feel like I'm just like a point guard, just passing the ball. Thomaesa Bailey. Thomaesa, you also got an announcement for us. How you feeling today?
I feel good. Good morning, Detroit. Thomaesa Bailey, we own everything. But also, I am going to be working with President Pro Tem Tate of the Detroit City Council, doing his special projects and initiatives. So you may see me out with a Protect Your Crown shirt on. You may see me out working with some of the CVIs. You may see me out doing a lot of things in that capacity as well. So just another thing to add to the list of things that I'm already doing in the city. And I'm really looking forward to doing a lot of that work.
Most definitely, most definitely. And here, you know, we keep up with what's happening in municipal government. This is all really taken from the notebook from Malachi. And that notebook, if you want to find out and see everything for it, go to bridgedetroit.com for that and much more. Also, I'm gonna be shameless plug. Check out Detroit Next. Check out Detroit Next. Yesterday was a very special episode about a lot of development with key developers in the city. So you definitely want to find out about that. So today's episode of Public Comment, we're talking about ensuring jobs for Detroiters and rental inspections, accountability, and infrastructure. So we're talking about them sidewalks, right? Because a lot of sidewalks, similar to mine, have not necessarily had the best days in and around the city of Detroit. So welcome back to Public Comment. And 12 million in contracts on the line for the different groups that inspect the rental properties. And a lot of this are given to out-of-town contractors. This was heightened by Councilmember Calloway. And there are also programs that we know are within the city of Detroit about training people so that they can do these inspections, especially when it comes to lead remediation, right? So it's a lot of people in the city of Detroit that should be doing work in the city of Detroit, especially if the city of Detroit is paying for it. So that's where I stand with my council member Calloway and many others about like we need to be doing this work. So it was a whole to-do at council that was talking about this. So it starts with 12 million in inspection contract approved. Each vendor will receive 3 million. Council ensured companies committed to hiring Detroiter. Build a workforce pipeline for property inspectors in the city. So I know that that's a lot up front. Malachi, you were there in person. What was the deal? How was the tone of it all?
Yeah, so the city has decided to contract with 3 different companies that were based around the state. One of them is based in Ohio to basically supplement the city's efforts to inspect rental properties. Specifically, they would be inspecting single and 2-family homes. So, duplexes and single-family homes, while the city and its inspectors mostly focus on larger apartment buildings, the multifamily units, and responding to complaints that they get from tenants like, hey, my landlord is ignoring this issue in my apartment. You need to come inspect this and get them into compliance. This, of course, is in the backdrop of the vast majority of properties in the city not being in compliance with the city's rules and regulations, which puts a lot of people in substandard housing conditions, right? And, to contextualize that, last year, I think the stat was about 10% are in compliance. So, yeah, 9 out of 10 rental properties in the city aren't in compliance, and that's why the council made some reforms last year to streamline the process of doing inspections.
All right, so this is something that it just rings in my head. As I say, you can be like a pass the ball off. Thomaesa, you've been studying a lot of this, like in advocacy of what could stand up for where people stand. Detroit is one of those unique places where renters don't have a lot of say, which is slowly but changing, right? So even today at 4 p.m., the first Renters Commission meeting will be taking place at Joseph Walker Williams Center. I'm gonna be there, so you can shake my hand if that's something that's on your to-do list. But I'm saying all of that to say, how do renters advocate for themselves in conditions like this? And also, how does it remain balanced and fair for those people that do own those properties?
That's a great question. I mean, so the Tenants Rights Commission, this is the first of its kind in the city of Detroit. So I'm really interested in seeing, what they uplift as the needs for tenants and in the city of Detroit. One of the things that I think about a lot is the fact that there is a rent control ban here in the state of Michigan. So if outside of looking at increases in rent, what are some other things that tenants can look to as far as protections are concerned? So there's a lot of housing in Detroit that is kind of like substandard. So helping tenants be able to hold landlords accountable when the housing stock that they have provided is not good. I mean, when I worked for Member Calloway's office, we had a group of apartments near Palmer Park that were, just dilapidated. There were people living in them, but they were not up to standard. And so we were trying to take the landlord to task, because if you're going to be renting out apartments in our community and elderly people are living there, you need to be making sure that those are habitable and are at the standard of living for people. So tenant protections like that help you be able to live in a home that is habitable, that is a place where you don't have to worry about rodents, and the cleanliness of the apartment, I think, is really important outside of looking at the rent prices increasing. But as far as landlords are concerned, landlords have a lot of protections already in the law, right? Even the ban on rent increases, right? Or the rent control ban. They already have a lot of leeway in what they can do in terms of charging for rent. They already have a lot of leeway in terms of being able to evict people for certain things. And so I just trying to find that balance and making sure that it's not too much in the favor of the landlords is going to be really key.
Yeah, and also this kind of goes into reference to right to counsel as well. So uplifted in the story, you talk about escrow. I don't know if anybody's ever been in an escrow situation, but an escrow situation is basically, it's cool to talk about, but it's when you have counsel, and counsel will keep that funds that would be going to whomever the person that you're owing money while legal matters are worked out. So the right to counsel legislation from a couple years back about saying, like, look, people need to not necessarily go into court where the only person that has representation, meaning an attorney, is the landlord. So that's uplifted. Now, I'm saying this needs to be in balance because it's just fresh in my mind from editing the episode of Detroit Next, where Sonia Mays was talking about a report that Detroit Future City did a couple years back, where a lot of the people that own properties, a lot of the landlords in the city of Detroit are mom and pop. So the capacity of what they can do. And a couple years back, I remember when the letter came, because it came through so many blocks. And I've been one of those people that I've rented out before too. So it's like, you got to get up to code, you got to get into inspection. And some of those landlords are meeting people in those gaps where rents are rising, but that person that may have inherited a home from family, that person that may have like 2 or 3 properties, but nothing more than that, can end up in the mix. So it's like, how do you balance this for the landlord that has just a little, but also don't get run over by these people that keep properties? Because I can think of a couple that were just family staying. Okay, this is Khary Frazier. So this isn't, Detroit is different. This isn't even public comment. But even when my aunt was staying at the Jeffersonian and my cousin was staying there, and just how long they had to deal with the fact that they didn't have a working elevator. And that has like 36 floors or something like that. And it was my aunt staying on like the 24th floor at the time, and she's 83 years old. It's like, this is ridiculous, and waiting time to get to that elevator. So that's just one of the small problems, but it can go and be a myriad of many others. So finding that balance, and I know I threw a whole lot out there, Malachi, for you to try to kind of pick up the pieces. You've been doing this public comment thing for a while, so I'm gonna pass over to you and see how you can piece some of this together.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things the council is trying to do, and there are things that are, they're limited in state law. Like you were saying, rental rental caps, I think, is one thing that has been proposed but hasn't really been able to advance because you need some legislative approval there. There's been conversation about a right to renew ordinance. A lot of tenant advocates who will probably be at the first commission meeting on Thursday have been pushing Council President Sheffield and her colleagues to pass a ordinance that would basically give you the ability, give you a guarantee that you could renew your lease, because they found that landlords were retaliating against people that put their rent into escrow or started organizing around getting improvements to these properties. They'd say, okay, you don't you don't like the condition, you no longer have a lease when this one's up. So that's another piece of legislation that they're pursuing to protect tenants. Obviously, we have the Tenants Rights Commission, which is different than a task force that actually should have some power. And part of the goal of that is to mediate conflicts between landlords and tenants before it enters the courtroom. And if it does enter the courtroom, we have a right to counsel program that offers free legal assistance. Although the future of that, I think, is somewhat in question with the loss of ARPA, federal pandemic dollars. There was some money in the budget that was put toward that. So in the short term, that program will continue. But what's the long-term view of that? I think that's a big question mark. So these are all things that, the next city council and the next mayor are going to have to focus on. We've seen some steps taken in the last year of doing this show to, improve compliance with properties, but I think it's going to be, I don't know, a slog is not the right word. I think it's going to take a while for more of these properties and certainly a sufficient number. We're at, 10%, when does that even get to 50%? And even having half of the properties in compliance is still pretty bad.
Yeah.
So
And this also goes into budget of how many inspectors exist out there. Hence, that's why this story even matters. And
right.
what does that inspection look like? And having people from the city do it, I think you get a cultural understanding similar to another one of those things I'm uplifting that past Detroit next about the people that do any form of appraising and understanding in property. Like if the people are from here, they can have a better understanding. Because you talk about the apartments at Palmer Park. I mean, I'm 42 years old, so I've known most of my life that that's a place where rent is going to be very reasonable, but you definitely may be dealing with some cousins. And when I say cousins, that's what we in my family in my neighborhood affectionately call roaches. You don't want to have an infestation of cousins.
I was talking to some security guards who were downtown a couple weeks ago, and one of them lived on Woodward. I can't remember the name of the building. And he was saying that he had a pretty bad bug problem, but he didn't want to leave because he couldn't afford the rent anywhere else. That he was kind of willing to put up with it to a certain extent because it was cheap enough for him to live there. So yeah, I mean, these senior buildings, there have been a lot of concerns voiced by council members about that, about the elevators in particular, about fire risk. Whitfield Calloway, one of her issues that we talk about on the show a lot is making sure that jobs are going to Detroiters when they sign contracts. And so there was a bit of drama, I guess. This got held back a week so that the administration could create some assurances that the jobs would go to local inspectors, even though the companies are all not based in Detroit. But I think that's an interesting aspect as well, what you brought up, that like having some understanding and being from the city would probably make that inspection process better.
When you're going to that downtown apartment, the perspective versus when you're going to that apartment in certain neighborhoods. Thomaesa, you are going to add in something about like just the balance of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, something that Malachi just mentioned was, the property may not be that great, but I can afford to live here, right? That's one of the things I think that is the tragedy in all this that is missed, is that we are in the middle of a housing crisis where rent is really high for those Detroiters who don't necessarily have the ability to pay. And so they're being forced through financial means to have to stay in these substandard houses with, a whole bunch of cousins and everything else that's going on, the elevator not working. But I have to stay here because why? I'm an elderly person and I want a fixed income. And, they already getting ready to cut my Social Security as it is. So I don't really have anywhere to go. So as we think about what landlords need to be doing, we need to be uplifting the stories of the elderly people and the young people and the mothers with small children who can't afford to go anywhere else. They have to stay here right? And I feel like the landlords sometimes in these situations know this, and they need to understand that this is not right and it's not acceptable in a lot of cases. And so we have to understand what's going on. And so people who are inspectors, who have perspectives of the city and of Detroiters and who understand what the housing crisis looks like, I think do need to be involved in this process, because we have a lot of folks who are stuck. We have a lot of mothers and grandmothers and people on, fixed income, disabled veterans who are stuck in these conditions, and we have to find a way to help them out, because it's very sad to see.
Yeah, and you all would be surprised, because even in neighborhoods like mine, so many renters over here, and you definitely look at the housing stock and say to yourself, I definitely don't necessarily know if that's up to code per se. You know what I'm saying? Just from the outside in. So I can only imagine from the inside out what it's looked like. So these are the dynamics, because if you all look at the variables in the equation, we're looking and taking into consideration where we're at in the state of America, the housing crisis that exists, and how high rents are. We're talking about it all on. It's almost like this is a long commercial for you to watch Detroit Next in the development episode, but we're talking about it. So the area median income and what goes to what's affordable housing, that plays a role in where renters stand and what say they have, and even landlords. So like, you mix all of this up, it creates conditions where definitely there are bad actors that exploit the conditions that people are kind of locked into this, and that's very sad. And then on the other flip side of it, like we say, because I just know a couple of them, like the person that owns a property or two, they're easier to pursue than some of the other people that may have like 45 properties and have attorney after attorney after attorney after attorney to take on whatever the city throws at them. So the leverage in this, and this speaks to right to counsel too, hence that renters commission, or as I guess the tenants commission, really comes into play, because even if without the money per se, just the advocacy in the ear and being able to enact something that moves closer to an ordinance for the city will really give some leverage and understanding of a lot of voice to this. You can sit in a city council meeting, and I can guarantee if you go to like, at least, let's just say you go to a month full of city council meetings, you're probably going to get, I don't know, on average, like about 6 residents that speak up about something that's going on in a place where they're renting from, because where do they even sound that out to? Malachi's there every week, so I'm sure if you had $1 for every time you heard that story,
I'd be rich.
You have a lot of dollars.
Maybe I'd still be doing this show, but it was like, it was like a little depressing to hear from the developers that came on our latest episode of Detroit Next, to hear them talk about how difficult it is to build more affordable housing. Because that's the other side of this, obviously, right? We're talking about people that are kind of stuck in this situation. Well, what's the alternative? Well, right now, I mean, there's not a lot of affordable housing available, and it seems like there won't be a significant number coming in the future. The city has been, slowly building that out, but the forces against that seem to be pretty big, and we get into that in the episode. But
definitely.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the meantime, we've got a lot of properties that need to get in compliance, and it's interesting to consider too that these contractors that were hired are going to be working with the properties that are most likely owned by those mom and pop smaller landlords. I mean, I don't think those landlords own like big multi-unit apartment complexes. I think they largely own, single family and, duplexes. So I don't know. We'll see what happens when they start interacting with these inspectors. And I'm curious to see how this kind of new, streamline enforcement process works, because there's already been some concerns about some of the lead cleanup rules that were changed, but we don't need to get into that right now.
Oh man,
that's a whole conversation.
Oh man, I'm just playing the other slides from it before we go to the next slide. And Councilmember Santiago Romero even said we need to organize and change laws at the state level around this, and that was uplifted by the both of you as well. And it seems like everything almost needs to kind of come through the state, and you're going to see some very new content from public comment, and We Own Everything talking to you a whole lot about that very, very soon. So we carry this over, and we're still talking about development in a lot of ways, but the accountability and infrastructure. So sidewalk repairs rejected. Council rejected $2.9 million in sidewalk repair contracts, citing misplaced responsibility. Whitfield Calloway says we can't keep up with sidewalk repairs and fund the contractor. This was connected to a proposal that on Detroit is different. We definitely upraised a lot of discussions about Proposal N, which we had a very good, I'm going to say, marketing campaign, because it was kind of for neighborhoods. But as you see, sometimes the advocacy for neighborhoods can be a developer gets some money, tears up your sidewalk, and guess who's paying for it? The city of Detroit. So the council was split 5-4 and on this vote. The bigger picture, there are many sidewalk squares that need repair, right? 470,000 sidewalk squares need repair. Only 5,000 addressed in rejected plan. City says repair funds came from withheld contractor payments, right? So the debate is basically like this, if you kind of can get the scope. I am paid to do some work for the city in development or given some subsidies, or I'm giving leeway. But to do the work that I need to do, I have to tear up the sidewalk. My sidewalk right now is torn up because DT is changing out the gas line and it's impacting the water line. And if you follow Khary Frazier on Instagram, you saw some of the chaos on my block. So now I have gravel like almost every 5 sidewalk squares, right? And this is sad because we just got new sidewalk squares 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. Now that I think about it. So, there goes the new sidewalk. And the development is impacting the sidewalk like that. And it's even said where DTE will come back on my block, and I'm making it personal. They say within a month, but they're delayed. So sometime in the summer, we should have our sidewalk back, which is kind of tough because I got my garden and all of that stuff. The aesthetics of Detroit is different, but Detroit is different. Not necessarily a development contract where we knew it was planned and everything that was going on, and connected to city funding too. Thomaesa, I'm gonna pass to you for this one first. What's the scope and understanding of all this?
Yeah, this to me was so interesting because it's like, so we don't want the city of Detroit paying for the repairs of the sidewalks because the contractors are the ones who are responsible for tearing up the sidewalks, which that I totally get because you need to be responsible for what you were supposed to be doing. But then it's like when you answer the phone at city council and it's an elderly person saying that they're in a wheelchair and they can't get in and out of their house because their sidewalk is all tore up, or this is a disabled person who can't walk, down the street because their sidewalk is tore up. Like you hear a lot of these stories and it's like, it's not, I don't know how much of a priority it should be, but it's one of those things that in fact that impacts Detroiters' quality of life quite a bit, especially our seniors and our disabled population. And it messes up the aesthetics of the neighborhoods and you can't use your property in the way that you would like to. So sidewalk repair is really, really needed, but it's a hard line because these contractors are the ones who tore up the sidewalks to begin with. So why shouldn't they be held responsible? Why shouldn't they have to pay for it? Why should the city come in? But also, too, we have to think about our residents. And if the sidewalks need to be repaired, if there are 470,000 sidewalk squares that need to be repaired, shouldn't we, at least try to do that? So for me, that was just kind of interesting on both sides to hear that argument. And it is something that I thought was super interesting. I'm really interested in hearing Malachi's perspective on it as well, since you may have a few more details. But for me, I just thought that was really kind of interesting, especially being on the phone with folks talking about their sidewalks and how they can't get around the way they need to.
Yeah, and this came up during the budget as well. The GSD, what is that? General Services Department. Yeah. They're working on this problem, and there's contracts that have been signed for this in the past. But this was specifically for the sidewalk flags, they call them. Squares is probably the better way to think of them. A block of sidewalk that were damaged by these proposal and demo contractors. The thing for me is like, what's the alternative? Like Thomaesa is saying, like we've got a bunch of damaged sidewalks and now we don't have a way to fix them. So is there going to be an alternative brought forward? They didn't really discuss that. As well as just the idea of like, what should the funding source for this really be? The city has a pot of the bond money that it was giving to a demolition contractor, and it said we're going to hold part of this contingent on whether you repair the sidewalk or not. If you don't repair the sidewalk, you won't get that $2,500. We're going to take that $2,500 and we're going to use that to fix the sidewalk. So you're not going to get your full amount, and then we have money to come in and replace it. I don't know. So like, was the city kind of always going to pay for the sidewalks to be repaired? Because if the contractors decided to do that, they were still going to get paid with the bond money that the city was providing. So I guess I don't really understand, because the way that, and sorry, you're seeing my scattered thought process here, but Luan Counts and Crystal Perkins, and I have to apologize. The photo that we included there is actually of Crystal. I think I sent some bad information to Khary. That is Crystal Perkins over at GSD.
Yeah.
They said basically that some level of sidewalk damage is kind of inevitable when you're doing this work. There's a lot of heavy machinery that's involved in demolishing a home, and it has to be up close. And they put down, you've probably seen them around town, they put down those like metal slabs over the concrete to try to protect them, but it's not a foolproof thing. So, this was basically built into the contracts, knowing that there would be some damage done to the sidewalks as a result of this work. And there was a funding source within the contract that was kind of identified. I don't know. I mean, so like, is the city paying for it or not? Like, I don't.
From the business mindset, I could look at it like, okay, I could have, this is really the layers. No, let me really put my business hat on. I went to Walsh College, business and accountancy. What I would look at, especially right now in this time, I'd be like, all right, the city said that they'll cover it for $2,500. We don't know what's going on with the rising cost of materials and time and labor and everything. And they said they'll do it for $2,500. I don't need that $2,500. I'm gonna let them deal with that. I would naturally do that. I would just, in my mind, from the business perspective. So the question becomes, is that $2,500 enough? And then if it needs to be renegotiated, I don't even necessarily know if you can renegotiate it. Like, that's the landlock of it. And it's tough because if what you're sharing is what it is and it's plain, I mean, I would naturally do that, because just let the city do it. It's the city sidewalk. They're going to be the ones for the compliance and everything. They already got crews connected to that. I can go on and get to my next project and make a whole lot more money. That's what I believe that the business hat of doing business would have that.
It'd be good to have some more data on that. I would love to know, like, out of all the demolitions that were done with Prop N, how many sidewalks were damaged? What percentage of the demo contractors didn't repair sidewalks that they broke? Some of that data I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to know. And that's a good point about the business mind. I wouldn't think about it in terms of a business perspective, because it's like the $2,500 is there for you to repair the sidewalk. Why would you not? But it's like, well, it's the city sidewalk. I'm not really going to think about that. It's not my issue, and that's an interesting perspective as well, because if the money was there in the contract for you to do it, why not do it? And is $2,500 enough? Are you just trying to cut your losses and move on? Like, what is the issue? And me thinking about it from a human perspective is like, somebody needs to fix these sidewalks. Okay.
Right.
Like, if it's in the contract for you to do it, if the city is going to withhold it and fix it is the main thing for me.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's still 5,000 sidewalks that need to get repaired here that don't have an easy answer. So I don't know. What are we going to see on this? I think is a big answer question for me moving forward. But it's interesting to think about how businesses, and we've talked about it on the show before, can just like pay a fee. Like, they decide that it's part of the business cost to just
I mean, it's the cost of doing business.
And we're kind of speculating, but I could see that. They would say it's worth it for us to just forego this $2,500 instead of going through the rigmarole of trying to fix a sidewalk.
And like I say, this is me, Khary Frazier, putting on my business hat. The same thing when it comes to hiring Detroiters. I'd be like, I can just pay a fee, and I don't necessarily have to pay the fee, because I saw that Little Caesars Arena didn't really pay the fee. I mean, I'm gonna hire all the Detroiters in the world. Like, and these are the challenges between development, and that's another reason. Commercial for the episode of Detroit Next, to watch that episode, as you're seeing 3 Black developers talk about the landscape for development. And as most of my decision-making process is just in everything in life, I look at life like it's an equation with different variables. So when you look at a lot of these variables to heighten the quality of life for residents, definitely deals with their homes, right? And similar to the original story, this kind of goes back into like heightening that quality of value for the home experience that Detroiters will have, which goes into what is happening with the housing stock in the city of Detroit, which now brings in development. Within development definitely comes in the people that will do the contracting and actually the work to build and develop these structures, right? And then now you're bringing in those developers and bankers and how they make those decisions. So the variables in that equation just starts adding more and more and more and more and more people. The challenge of that is as you add more and more and more and more and more people to this equation, those other people and the agency they have make the resident and that homeowner less and less valuable in the equation. But that's Khary Frazier's stance on another public comment. That's where I close out. With that, we'll go to Thomaesa. So let the people know.
We own everything. A political education company. Also going to be working with Pro Tem Tate, as I mentioned earlier. Also, just dropped an interview with Chantel Watkins, who's running for City Council for District 5. So if you guys want to check that out on We Own Everything's YouTube page, and also on Instagram as well. So just more political education for the people in the community, and here on Public Comment, uplifting advocates and the people's perspective.
Malachi.
BridgeDetroit.com is where we're at. Free news for you every day. Our website is being stocked with good info, and we have newsletters that are dropping in your inbox if you don't feel like opening up your web browser. You can find us on socials as well. These conversations are always based on what happens in the Tuesday formal session of the council, and I do a breakdown called the Council Notebook that comes out Wednesday morning, so definitely check that out. There's always a bunch of stuff in there that we didn't talk about. This week there's some interesting things about a native burial mound over at historic Fort Wayne being transferred back to the tribe. It was interesting to go into the Internet Archive and read about some of the archaeologists that were digging up these sacred sites and the lack of respect that they had for that in the 1800s. Probably not surprising for most. But yeah, we are also doing Detroit Next. That is our election podcast. We had Santil Jenkins on recently and then had a follow-up conversation about development. So those episodes will be out shortly. As Khary mentioned, the development one is already out. And I think there's some really good information in there for people that are kind of hungry for more context on development, something we talk about a lot on the show, but we don't really have direct experience. And we talked with 3 different developers who are kind of at different levels in terms of their projects. So I thought that was a cool conversation and plenty more to come. So thanks for watching.
Definitely. So with that, we bid you adieu till next week. And I did say that the tax assessor episode is coming. It's coming. It's just a lot to climb through. It definitely feels a whole lot like it's heavy. It's heavy. And it's variables. And Malachi, keep up with Bridge Detroit. You know we're gonna be covering that because that's gonna be big in this election too. With that, peace. You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. the live stream. Detroit is different in Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit.